The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening as I sat in the back of my broken-down Bentley, watching my driver Anthony try to figure out what was wrong with the engine. At 72 years old, I had seen plenty of inconveniences in my life, but being stuck in the worst part of the city during a thunderstorm wasn't exactly how I planned to end my day. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm afraid we're going to need a tow truck," Anthony called out from under the hood. "The engine just died completely." I sighed and pulled out my phone to call for help, but the signal was terrible under this old concrete bridge. The area looked like something out of a nightmare. Broken glass everywhere, graffiti covering the walls, and the smell of garbage mixed with something I didn't want to identify. This was definitely not the kind of neighborhood where a man in a $3,000 suit should be wandering around alone. As I stepped out of the car to get better phone reception, I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was the sound of a baby crying, not just fussing, but the kind of desperate wailing that meant something was seriously wrong. The crying was coming from somewhere under the bridge, deeper in the shadows where I could barely see anything. Every instinct told me to get back in the car and wait for the tow truck, but that baby's cries were getting weaker, and I couldn't just ignore it. I walked carefully toward the sound, using my phone's flashlight to navigate around the puddles and debris. What I saw next will haunt me for the rest of my life. There, tucked against the concrete wall of the bridge, was a small blue tent that looked like it had seen better days. The fabric was torn in several places and held together with duct tape. Next to it was a shopping cart filled with what looked like someone's entire life: a few clothes, some canned food, and baby supplies. The crying was definitely coming from inside that tent. "Hello?" I called out softly, not wanting to scare whoever was in there. "Is everything okay? I heard a baby crying." The tent flap opened slowly, and a young man's head poked out. He looked to be in his early 20s, with dark hair that was too long and clothes that had seen too many days without washing. But it was his face that made my heart skip a beat. Those eyes, that jawline, the way he held his head, it was like looking at a ghost. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaky and defensive. He was holding a tiny baby, wrapped in what looked like an old towel, and the little one was still crying weakly. "My name is Harold," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and non-threatening. "My car broke down over there, and I heard the baby. Are you both okay?" The young man looked at me suspiciously, probably wondering what a well-dressed old man was doing in this part of town. "We're fine," he lied, even though it was obvious they were anything but fine. The baby's cries were getting weaker, and I could see the young man was shivering, despite the warm evening. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble," I said, taking a small step closer, "but that baby sounds sick, and you both look like you could use some help. When's the last time either of you had a real meal?" The question seemed to break something inside him, and his shoulders sagged. "3 days," he whispered, looking down at the baby in his arms. "I've been giving her all the formula I could afford, but there's not much left." My heart was breaking watching this scene unfold. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy," he said quietly. "And this is my daughter, Grace. She's 8 months old." Tommy. The name hit me like a physical blow, but I tried not to show it. "That's a beautiful name. Both of them." I paused, studying his face more carefully in the dim light. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. "Tommy, what's your last name?" He hesitated for a long moment, like he was deciding whether to trust me. Finally, he said, "Whitmore. Tommy Whitmore." The world stopped spinning. Everything around me, the rain, the traffic noise, even baby Grace's crying, faded into complete silence. I felt like I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I had just heard. Whitmore. My name. My family name. I stared at this young man, at Tommy, and suddenly I could see it all clearly. The shape of his nose was exactly like my son Michael's. His hands, the way he moved, even the stubborn set of his jaw when he was being defensive. This wasn't just some random homeless person. This was my grandson. My grandson, who I never knew existed, was living under a bridge with a sick baby. Did you say Whitmore? I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible over the rain. Tommy nodded, looking confused by my reaction. Yeah. Why, do you know that name? I couldn't speak. I couldn't tell him that I was Harold Whitmore, that I had been searching for any trace of my son Michael for over 20 years, that I had given up hope of ever having a family again. I couldn't tell him that I was his grandfather, because if Michael had never mentioned me, there had to be a reason. Tommy, I said slowly, my voice shaking, where is your father? Where is Michael? The change in Tommy's expression was immediate and devastating. His face crumpled, and he held baby Grace tighter against his chest. My father left 6 months ago, he said, tears starting to fall. Just disappeared one day and never came back. But my grandfather died in a car accident when I was 5 years old. At least, that's what my dad always told me. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. Dead? Michael had told his son I was dead? I stood there in the rain, staring at my grandson and great-granddaughter, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. 23 years of believing I had no family left, and here they were, living in conditions that no human being should have to endure. Tommy was still looking at me, with confusion and growing concern. Sir, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. If only he knew how right he was. I couldn't just stand there in the rain staring at Tommy like I had lost my mind. The baby, Grace, my great-granddaughter, was still crying, and both of them were soaking wet and shivering. Whatever complicated emotions were racing through my head would have to wait. Right now, they needed help. Tommy, listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There's a diner about 2 blocks from here. Let me take you and Grace there so we can get you both warm and fed. We need to talk. He looked at me suspiciously. I don't have money for a diner, and I don't take charity from strangers. You're not taking charity, I said firmly. And I'm not exactly a stranger. Please, just trust me for 1 hour. That baby needs to get out of this cold, and you look like you haven't slept in days. Tommy glanced down at Grace, who had stopped crying but was making weak, whimpering sounds that scared me more than her screaming had. After a long moment, he nodded. Okay, but just for an hour. He quickly packed their few belongings into a backpack that had more holes than fabric, and I helped him collapse the tent. As we walked toward the diner, I called Anthony and told him to wait with the car. I had more important things to deal with right now. The diner was one of those old-fashioned places with cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lights that flickered. The waitress looked surprised to see a man in an expensive suit walk in with a homeless young man and a baby, but she didn't say anything. I asked for a corner booth where we could have some privacy. Order whatever you want, I told Tommy as we sat down, and get some milk for Grace if they have it. Tommy's hands were shaking as he looked at the menu. I can't remember the last time I saw this much food in one place, he whispered. When the waitress came over, he ordered scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, pancakes, and orange juice. And do you have any whole milk for the baby? He asked hopefully. While we waited for the food, I watched Tommy try to calm Grace down. She was so tiny and pale, and something about her breathing didn't sound right. Tommy, when's the last time Grace saw a doctor? His face fell. About 3 months ago, at the free clinic, they said she has something wrong with her heart, but the surgery to fix it costs more money than I'll ever see in my lifetime. He looked down at her with such love and desperation that it broke my heart. $200,000. Might as well be $2 million. $200,000. I spent more than that on art for my office last year. The idea that my great-granddaughter was suffering because of money, something I had more of than I could ever spend, made me feel sick. Tell me about your father, I said carefully. Tell me about Michael. Tommy's expression hardened. What's to tell? He was a good dad when I was little, but something changed when I got older. He started drinking more, staying out all night, getting angry about everything. Then 6 months ago, he just left. Didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note, nothing. Just took what little money we had and disappeared. And he told you your grandfather was dead? Yeah, when I was 5. Said there was a car accident and that we were all alone now. I used to ask about other family members, but he always said it was just us. Tommy looked at me curiously. Why are you asking all these questions? And why did you react so weird when I told you my last name? The food arrived before I had to answer, and I watched Tommy eat like he hadn't seen food in weeks, which was probably true. He kept giving tiny spoonfuls of milk to Grace, who seemed to perk up a little bit with something in her stomach. Tommy, I said slowly, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to believe. He stopped eating and looked at me with those eyes that were so much like Michael's, so much like my own. What? I took a deep breath. This was going to change everything, and I wasn't sure either of us was ready for it. My full name is Harold Whitmore. I'm not just some stranger who happened to find you under that bridge. I'm your grandfather. Tommy stared at me for a long moment, then started laughing. Not happy laughing, the kind of bitter, disbelieving laugh that comes when life throws you one more impossible thing. That's not funny, old man. My grandfather is dead. No, Tommy, I'm not dead. I'm very much alive, and I've been looking for you and your father for over 20 years. The laughter stopped abruptly. Tommy's face went completely white, and he gripped Grace tighter. That's impossible. My dad wouldn't lie about something like that. Wouldn't he? I asked gently. Think about it, Tommy. Why would your father tell you I was dead unless he had a reason to keep us apart? I could see the wheels turning in Tommy's head, and I could see the exact moment when he started to believe me. His hands began shaking again, but this time it wasn't from hunger or cold. If you're really my grandfather, he whispered, then why didn't you ever try to find us? Why didn't you ever come looking? I did try, I said, my voice breaking. I hired private investigators. I searched for years, but your father made sure you were impossible to find. He changed addresses constantly, never stayed in one place long enough to leave a trail. Tommy was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. All those years, I thought we were alone. When things got bad, when Dad started drinking, when we didn't have enough money for food, I used to wish I had a grandfather who could help us. And you were out there the whole time? I was out there, I confirmed, reaching across the table to touch his hand. And I never stopped looking. I never stopped hoping I'd find you someday. Grace started fussing again, and Tommy automatically started rocking her, but his eyes never left my face. Prove it, he said suddenly. If you're really my grandfather, prove it. I pulled out my wallet and showed him my driver's license, my credit cards, anything with the Whitmore name on it. Then I pulled out my phone and showed him something I had carried with me for 23 years, a photo of Michael holding a baby. That's your father, I said softly, holding you on the day you were born. Tommy stared at the photo, and I watched his whole world crumble and rebuild itself in the span of 30 seconds. Tommy stared at that photo for what felt like forever, his finger tracing the image of his father's young face. I could see him trying to process everything, that his grandfather was alive, that his father had lied to him his entire life, and that the well-dressed stranger who found him under a bridge was actually family. I don't understand, he finally whispered, still holding Grace close. Why would he tell me you were dead? Why would he keep us apart? I don't know all the reasons yet, I admitted, but right now, what matters is that I found you, both of you. I looked at Grace, who was finally sleeping peacefully in Tommy's arms. And I'm going to make sure you never have to live under a bridge again. Tommy shook his head. I can't just accept help from you. I don't even know you. You're my grandson, I said firmly. You're my family, and family takes care of family. I pulled out my phone and made a call. Anthony, change of plans. We're going to need the jet ready to fly to the estate tonight. And call Dr. Morrison. Tell him I need the best pediatric cardiologist he knows to meet us there as soon as possible. Tommy's eyes went wide. Jet? What are you talking about? I'm taking you home, Tommy. Both of you. The next few hours passed in a blur. I paid for Tommy and Grace to get cleaned up at a nearby hotel while I arranged for clothes to be delivered. Proper clothes that actually fit. When Tommy emerged from the shower wearing a simple but well-made shirt and jeans, he looked like a completely different person. He looked like the grandson I had always imagined I might have someday. The drive to the private airfield was quiet. Tommy kept staring out the window like he was seeing the world for the first time, which, in a way, he was. Grace slept in a proper car seat that I had someone rush over, the first safe car seat she had ever been in. "I've never been on a plane before," Tommy said quietly as we pulled up to the jet. "Well, this isn't just any plane," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "This is going to be quite an experience." When Tommy saw the private jet, his mouth fell open. It wasn't the biggest plane in my fleet, but it was certainly luxurious. Leather seats, a full kitchen, even a small bedroom in the back. Tommy walked up the steps like he was in a dream. "This is yours?" he asked, running his hand along the polished wood paneling. "It's ours," I corrected him. "Everything I have, Tommy. It's all family. And you're the only family I have left." During the 2-hour flight to my estate, I told Tommy stories about his father as a child. I showed him videos on my tablet. Michael's first steps, his high school graduation, the day he started working at my company. Tommy watched everything with hungry eyes, like he was trying to memorize every detail. "He looks so happy in these," Tommy said, watching a video of teenage Michael laughing at something off camera. "I remember him being happy sometimes when I was little, but not like this." "He was happy," I said sadly. "We all were, before everything went wrong." "What did go wrong?" Tommy asked. But I wasn't ready to answer that question yet. Some truths needed to wait. When we landed, a car was waiting to take us to the estate. Tommy's reaction when he saw my home was everything I had hoped for and more. The mansion sat on 200 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, with gardens that had taken decades to cultivate, and a view of the mountains that never failed to take my breath away. "You live here?" Tommy whispered as we drove up the long driveway. "All by yourself?" "I have staff," I said. "But yes, it's been just me for a very long time. Too long." Mrs. Chen, my housekeeper, was waiting at the front door with Dr. Morrison and the pediatric cardiologist he had recommended, Dr. Williams. I had called ahead and explained the situation, and both doctors were prepared to examine Grace immediately. "Let's get this little one looked at, doctor," Williams said gently, taking Grace from Tommy's arms. "Don't worry, young man. We're going to take very good care of her." While the doctors examined Grace in the medical room I had set up years ago for emergencies, I gave Tommy a tour of the house. He was quiet, overwhelmed, touching things carefully like he was afraid he might break something priceless. "This was your father's room," I said, opening the door to Michael's childhood bedroom. I had kept it exactly the same for 23 years. The baseball trophies on the shelves, the posters on the walls, even the books he had been reading before he left. Tommy walked around the room slowly, picking up a baseball glove that still sat on the desk. He played baseball? He was good too. Made varsity as a sophomore. I pulled out a photo album from the bookshelf. "Here, look at this." We spent an hour going through photos and memories. Tommy saw his father as a little boy, as a teenager, as a young man full of promise and potential. I could see him trying to reconcile these images with the broken man who had abandoned him. Dr. Williams found us there an hour later, and his expression was serious but hopeful. "The good news is that Grace's condition is definitely treatable," he said. "She has a ventricular septal defect, a hole in the wall between the two lower chambers of her heart. It's serious, but with surgery, she can live a completely normal life." "How much?" Tommy asked immediately, that familiar look of desperation creeping back into his eyes. "Don't worry about the cost," I said firmly. "When can we schedule the surgery?" "I'd like to do it as soon as possible," Dr. Williams said. "Tomorrow morning, if you're comfortable with that." Every day we wait, the strain on her heart increases. Tommy looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I can't let you pay for this. It's too much." "Tommy," I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. "This is my great-granddaughter. She's family, and I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let me do this." That night, I showed Tommy to the guest room next to mine, a room that I secretly hoped would become his permanent room. As I tucked Grace into a proper crib for the first time in her life, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: hope. "Grandpa Harold?" Tommy said quietly from the doorway. It was the first time he had called me Grandpa, and the word hit me like a physical force. "Thank you," he whispered. "For everything." "Thank you," I replied, "for letting me find you." The surgery was scheduled for 7 in the morning, and I don't think either Tommy or I slept much that night. I found him at 5:30, sitting in the nursery just watching Grace sleep in her crib. He looked exhausted and terrified. "She's so small," he whispered when he saw me in the doorway. "What if something goes wrong?" "Dr. Williams is the best pediatric heart surgeon on the East Coast," I assured him, though I was just as nervous. "Grace is going to be fine." The surgery took 4 hours, 4 of the longest hours of my life. Tommy paced the hospital waiting room like a caged animal, and I found myself praying for the first time in decades. When Dr. Williams finally emerged with a smile on his face, we both nearly collapsed with relief. "Perfect success," he announced. "The repair went exactly as planned. Grace is going to have a completely normal, healthy heart." Tommy broke down crying right there in the waiting room, and I held my grandson while he sobbed with relief and exhaustion. When we were finally allowed to see Grace in recovery, she looked so tiny, surrounded by all the medical equipment, but her color was already better than I had ever seen it. "Look at her," Tommy whispered, gently touching her little hand. "She looks stronger already." Over the next few days, as Grace recovered, Tommy and I spent more time together than I had spent with anyone in years. I showed him around the estate, introduced him to the staff, and began teaching him about the family business. He was incredibly smart, much smarter than he gave himself credit for, and he absorbed information like a sponge. "You built all this from nothing?" he asked one afternoon as we walked through my home office, looking at the awards and photos documenting 40 years of business success. "Your great-grandfather was a factory worker," I told him. "I was the first person in our family to go to college. Started my first company with $5,000 I borrowed from the bank." Tommy studied a photo of me from 30 years ago, standing in front of my first office building. "Dad never told me any of this. He never told me we came from people who built things." "Your father was supposed to take over the company someday," I said carefully. "He worked for me for several years after college. He was good at it, too." "What happened?" Tommy asked, and I could see he was starting to piece together that there was more to the story than I had told him. "It's complicated," I said, which was becoming my standard answer whenever he asked about Michael. But Tommy was getting more persistent with his questions. Every day, as Grace got stronger and our bond grew deeper, he would ask more about why his father had left, why he had lied about my death, why our family had been torn apart, and every day, I found it harder to avoid giving him real answers. "I've been thinking," Tommy said one evening as we sat in the library after dinner. Grace was sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside us, completely recovered from her surgery. "My dad didn't just make a mistake when he told me you were dead. That's not the kind of thing you get wrong. He did it on purpose." I looked up from the business reports I was reviewing. "Tommy, he wanted to make sure I never tried to find you," Tommy continued, his voice getting stronger. "Which means something happened between you two. Something bad enough that he was willing to let his son grow up thinking he had no family." I set down my papers and really looked at my grandson. In just 1 week, he had transformed from the desperate young man I found under the bridge into someone who looked like he belonged in this house, in this life. He was wearing clothes that fit, he had gained weight from eating regular meals, and most importantly, the constant worry and fear had left his eyes. But now I could see a different kind of determination there. "You're right," I admitted. "Something did happen. Something that broke our family apart." "Tell me," Tommy said simply. "I don't think you're ready to hear it." "Grandpa Harold," Tommy said, leaning forward in his chair. A week ago, I was living under a bridge with a dying baby, eating out of garbage cans and wondering if we were going to survive another day. I think I can handle whatever you need to tell me about my father. He had a point. This young man had survived things that would have broken most people. Maybe he was stronger than I was giving him credit for. It's not just about what your father did, I said slowly. It's about what I did too. The mistakes I made, the ways I failed him. I need to know, Tommy insisted. I need to understand why he left us. Why he let Grace almost die when he knew there was family who could help. I need to understand why he chose to let us suffer instead of swallowing his pride and coming to you. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where Michael used to play as a child. Your father didn't leave because of pride, Tommy. He left because he was ashamed. And he was ashamed because of something he did that he thought I could never forgive. What did he do? I turned back to face my grandson, this young man who had already shown more strength and character in 1 week than most people show in a lifetime. He deserved the truth, even if it was going to hurt him. Tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow I'll tell you everything. But tonight, let's just be grateful that Grace is healthy and that we found each other. Tommy nodded, though I could see he wasn't entirely satisfied with waiting another day. Okay, but I want the whole truth, Grandpa Harold. Whatever it is, I can handle it. As I watched him gently pick up Grace and carry her upstairs to put her to bed, I hoped he was right. Because the truth about Michael was going to change how Tommy saw his father forever, and I wasn't sure either of us was ready for that. But he deserved to know. After everything he had been through, after all the lies he had been told, Tommy deserved to finally understand why his family had been destroyed. Tomorrow, I would tell him about the money, about the gambling, and about the choice Michael made that changed all our lives forever. The next morning, I found Tommy in the garden playing with Grace on a blanket under the old oak tree where Michael used to climb as a boy. Grace was laughing, actually laughing. For the first time since I had met her, the surgery had given her new life, and watching her giggle as Tommy made funny faces was almost enough to make me forget the difficult conversation we needed to have. She's like a completely different baby, Tommy said when he saw me approaching. Look at her, Grandpa Harold. She's so happy. She's beautiful, I said, sitting down on the bench nearby. Just like her father. Tommy picked up Grace and settled beside me on the bench. You promised you'd tell me the truth today. About my dad. About what really happened. I had been dreading this moment all week. But looking at Tommy now, healthy, safe, with his daughter thriving in his arms, I knew he was strong enough to handle whatever I had to tell him. Your father started working for my company right after college, I began. He was brilliant, Tommy. Natural leadership skills, great with people, innovative ideas. I was so proud of him. I thought he would take over the business someday and do even better things than I had done. Tommy listened quietly, rocking Grace gently as she started to get sleepy. But Michael had a problem that I didn't know about for a long time. He liked to gamble. It started small, poker games with friends, occasional trips to the casino, but it got worse over the years. Much worse. I could see Tommy's expression starting to change as he began to understand where this story was heading. By the time you were born, Michael was in serious trouble. He owed money to some very dangerous people. The kind of people who don't just ask nicely when you can't pay them back. He was scared, desperate, and he didn't know how to tell me what was happening. How much money? Tommy asked quietly. $2 million. Tommy's face went pale. $2 million? How could he possibly owe that much? Gambling addiction doesn't follow logic, Tommy. It's a disease, and it had completely taken over your father's life. He was borrowing money to pay off debts, then gambling that money, trying to win back what he had lost. It's a cycle that only gets worse. I stood up and walked a few steps away, the memories still painful after all these years. The people he owed money to gave him an ultimatum. Pay up in 30 days, or they would hurt his family. They would hurt you and your mother. Tommy was holding Grace tighter now, and I could see tears starting to form in his eyes. So Michael did the only thing he could think of. He stole the money from my company. $2 million. Transferred out of our accounts over the course of 3 months. He was careful about it. Made it look like legitimate business expenses. But eventually, our accountants caught the discrepancy. And you found out it was him, Tommy said, his voice barely a whisper. I confronted him in my office on a Friday afternoon. I'll never forget the look on his face when I showed him the evidence. He broke down completely. Told me everything. About the gambling, about the debts, about the threats against your family. I sat back down next to Tommy, who was now crying silently. I was furious, Tommy. Not just about the money, but about the lies, about the fact that he had put the company at risk, about the fact that he hadn't trusted me enough to come to me for help before it got that bad. What did you do? Tommy asked. I told him I would pay off his debts, but that he had to get help for his gambling addiction. I told him he couldn't work for the company anymore, but that I would support him and your family while he got his life back together. Tommy looked confused. That doesn't sound so terrible. You were trying to help him. But Michael was so ashamed, so convinced that he had destroyed everything, that he couldn't accept my help. He said he had ruined the family name, that he didn't deserve forgiveness, that you and your mother would be better off without him. The tears were flowing freely down my cheeks now as I remembered that awful conversation. He left that weekend, just disappeared, and when I tried to find him, to find you, I discovered he had told everyone that I was dead. He told your mother I had died in a car accident. He told you the same thing when you were old enough to ask questions. Tommy was sobbing now, holding Grace close to his chest. He let us suffer for 20 years because he was too ashamed to accept help? I think he convinced himself that you were better off without him, without our family. He thought the Whitmore name was cursed, that he had brought shame on all of us. But we weren't better off, Tommy cried. We were poor, Grandpa Harold. We struggled every single day. Mom worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. And when she got sick and couldn't work anymore, we lost everything. She died in a county hospital because we couldn't afford decent medical care. This was the first time Tommy had mentioned his mother's death, and the pain in his voice broke my heart completely. If Dad had just swallowed his pride, if he had just accepted your help, Mom might still be alive. Grace would have had the surgery she needed months ago. We never would have ended up homeless. I put my arm around Tommy's shoulders as he wept for everything his family had lost, for all the years of unnecessary suffering, for the grandfather he never knew he had. I'm so sorry, Tommy, I whispered. I'm sorry I couldn't find you sooner. I'm sorry your father's shame kept us apart for so long. We sat there under the oak tree for a long time, holding each other and grieving for the family we should have been, for the years we had lost, for the pain that could have been avoided if Michael had just been brave enough to accept forgiveness. Finally, Tommy looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I forgive him, he said quietly, and I forgive you too. We can't change the past, but we can make sure Grace grows up, knowing she has family who loves her. Yes, I agreed, looking down at my great-granddaughter sleeping peacefully in her father's arms. We can make sure she never feels alone the way you did. And for the first time in 23 years, I felt like I truly had a family again.